Okay, let's try and unpack this. The funeral of Pope Francis in Rome. It sort of unexpectedly became the setting for, well, what some people are calling a potentially pivotal moment.
Yeah, almost like something out of a film, right?
Exactly. President Trump and President Zelensky, two central figures in this whole incredibly complex situation, seen talking just before the ceremony actually started.
It really makes you wonder what was said, and maybe more importantly, what it all signifies.
Well, what's really fascinating, I think, is just how unlikely the setting was and the timing.
Right, so close to the Pope service starting. You had chairs apparently being set up last minute.
Hmm.
Macron was nearby for a bit.
Hmm.
It really suggests, doesn't it, that this wasn't some long-planned formal meeting, maybe even facilitated by others who were there.
Yeah, feels quite spontaneous. And Zelensky himself, he posted on X calling it a symbolic meeting, potentially historic.
Strong words.
So for Ukraine, the initial take seems to be that, look, this unplanned chat was maybe a small but still significant diplomatic step.
A win, perhaps.
A small one, yeah. The hope, as Vita Kovalenko, who's got deep connections inside Ukraine, kind of explains it, is that maybe Trump is starting to get a clearer picture of the really serious consequences here.
And that he sees the U.S. needs to stay involved at the negotiating table.
That seems to be the hope, but it does raise a big question, doesn't it? Is this a real shift in how Trump sees things, or is it, more strategic?
Well, his silence with the press afterwards on the flight back from Rome, that was interesting.
Very noticeable.
And then came that social media post saying he was skeptical about Putin actually wanting to end the war, even suggesting Putin might be, quote, stringing him along.
Which is, I think, the first time he's publicly criticized Putin quite like that, isn't it?
It certainly seems like it, a definite shift in tone.
Our expert former ambassador Robert Seri, his reaction was sort of better late than never.
Right, suggesting that U.S. pressure on Putin is needed.
It definitely hints that maybe Trump's position is hardening a bit. But then you look at this rumored peace plan, this 7-point plan that's been doing a rounds.
Yes, and this is where it gets really, really complicated.
Definitely.
So this rumored plan, what we're hearing is it proposes an immediate ceasefire and unconditional peace talks between Ukraine and Russia.
Okay, on the surface, that sounds, well, like a start.
It does. But the potential sticking points, they're huge. For instance, the idea that Ukraine might have to give up its NATO membership ambitions.
A major concession, and it's not even clear if that would be temporary or permanent, right?
Exactly. The details are murky, but even suggesting it is massive for Kyiv.
Absolutely. And then you get to the really controversial bit. The U.S. potentially recognizing Russia's annexation of Crimea.
That's the one that really jumps out.
But just think about the implications of that for a second. If the U.S. did that, they'd be aligning themselves with countries like Iran, North Korea, Yemen, Cuba.
Not exactly the usual company on issues of international law.
No. It raises serious questions about upholding those principles, doesn't it? And, potentially encouraging others to think they can grab territory by force. Geopolitical analyses keep stressing that point.
It's a huge deal. And the reaction from Ukraine has been pretty firm.
Zelensky was very clear. Crimea is not for negotiation. Full stop.
Although Kyiv's mayor, Klitschko, did suggest territorial talks might have to happen eventually. But the feeling now, as Vita Kovalenko really emphasizes, is ceasefire first.
The priority has to be stopping the killing.
The human cost is just too high to let it drag on without at least a pause.
Which, chillingly, brings us to something else. After that recent phone call between Trump and Putin, our source indicates a really alarming spike in Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities. Like 4 to 5 times the average increase.
4 to 5 times, wow.
And in some places, apparently up to 20 times higher.
20? That's
Yeah.
devastating. It's not just abstract numbers either, is it?
No, not at all. It hits people directly. Vita mentioned her own aunt had to leave Ukraine just to get medical care.
Because it was too dangerous to get treatment inside the country.
Exactly. And Ambassador Seri, he was just in Ukraine for a month. He talked about seeing bombings himself.
First-hand experience.
Yeah, and the constant hardship his wife's family is facing. Elderly relatives in high-rise buildings, can they even rely on an ambulance getting there? It's these real, tangible human tragedies.
Awful. Just awful.
And yet, it's almost unbelievable, but amidst all this destruction, people are still trying to rebuild.
Really? Even now?
Yeah, the source mentioned a Dutch foundation. They're already working in places like Chernihiv, which are relatively safer, I suppose, using this interesting circular building approach.
Wow. That really speaks volumes about Ukrainian resilience, doesn't it? That determination to look forward.
Absolutely. Vital for morale and for the future, whenever that peace comes.
Okay, so shifting back to the diplomacy,
Yeah.
we also saw Mark Rutte meeting with Trump unannounced.
Right, and Root was noticeably quite complimentary towards Trump.
Yeah, that was interesting. Seemed like a deliberate tactic, perhaps, trying to gain some influence.
It's hard not to see it that way. The language was very positive, as our expert noted. But maybe, if that approach actually helps open doors, gets more pressure on Putin, maybe it's necessary.
A pragmatic move, perhaps? Root did sound cautiously optimistic, talking about a potential positive end under Trump. But he also admitted there's still huge uncertainty about Putin's real intentions.
He did make that key point, though, didn't he? That Ukraine is playing ball.
Yes, putting the onus squarely on Russia now to de-escalate.
So this cautious optimism, does it connect to any specific timing?
Well, there are a few dates coming up. Trump's first 100 days ends late April. That's often a time presidents want to show some wins.
Uh-huh.
Then you've got Russia's Victory Day, May 9th. Putin will definitely want to project strength then, maybe claim some kind of victory.
It's always a big deal for Moscow.
And then there's this rumor, this possibility of a meeting in Saudi Arabia, maybe early May.
Involving Trump and Putin.
Possibly. Maybe even Zelensky, too. It seems Saudi Arabia is stepping up as a potential mediator.
Saudi Arabia, that's quite a development in itself, isn't it? I mean, a different kind of player getting involved.
It is. And apparently they've hosted high-level meetings related to this conflict before. It does suggest the global diplomatic map might be sort of shifting.
Interesting. And all this maneuvering is happening against the backdrop of Pope Francis's constant calls for peace.
Even though he couldn't deliver his Easter message himself. Poor health. The message itself, calling for peace for martyred Ukraine, was delivered. His wish for peace is still very present.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it? Could that sustained moral plea actually influence things in the next few weeks?
It's hard to say. From the Ukrainian side, as Vita Kovalenko made really clear, what they desperately want is a just peace.
Not just any peace, not one forced on them through more concessions and pressure.
Exactly. And that's the core tension, really. Ambassador Sari shared that assessment, that the war is probably unwinnable for Ukraine in the long run just because of the awful toll in soldiers' lives.
A view that echoes Trump's line that it just has to end.
Yes. But how it ends and what that end looks like, that's where the views diverge sharply. There's a sense that, okay, even if there are territorial changes, the vast bulk of Ukraine would still be Ukraine. Sovereign.
A basis to rebuild with European help.
Right. But that's a big but. That long-term risk of Russia trying again down the line, that doesn't just disappear. It remains a very serious concern.
So wrapping this all up, we've gone from this quite startling meeting at a papal funeral through the weeds of a complex, maybe controversial peace proposal,
7 points, yeah.
to the grim reality of attacks ramping up on the ground, and then these sort of glimmers of diplomatic movement involving new players like Saudi Arabia.
And Trump's stance on Putin, it seems to be evolving, maybe. Still a bit ambiguous, but definitely different. Adds another layer of complexity.
The level of uncertainty is just immense, isn't it? You've got all these different actors with clearly different goals, different ideas of what a resolution even looks like.
Absolutely. And the voices from inside Ukraine really hammer home the ongoing human suffering and that deep, deep desire for a peace that actually respects their sovereignty, their integrity.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with this final thought maybe. What does a just peace actually look like in this situation when you weigh the human cost, the geopolitics? What role should the international community play in getting to something lasting?
And maybe also, how much can these seemingly small, almost random events, like that encounter in the Vatican, could they actually spark bigger shifts? Could they be catalysts?
Definitely something to mull over.